Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The
The doctors
doctors
are
are
in.
in.
So, Tom, the other day I was working on an audiobook and I noticed something as I was narrating that probably would give you a heart attack. And I thought we should discuss it. Which
Okay.
is adverbs, because I know you have been on me to drop adverbs from my writing.
It's not
But
me, it's Stephen King.
oh yeah, blame Stephen King. No, but I get it.
I
I
must
get it.
obey the Lord, Stephen King.
But what was interesting, and I've been noticing this as I've been narrating more publisher books in YA. So they're modern books, they're current books. And that's that people would rather write fast and get in and out of the thought than be flowery to describe it. Now, I'm not saying like they would pad it out with like 20 words just to say, he ran quickly or something, but they'll use an adverb if it's a faster way to get there. And I thought, that's interesting. Have writing styles evolved?
Hmm. So you're not talking about like the style, like Darren Aronofsky has a style of writing versus, Steven Spielberg has a writing style. You're talking about the literal structure of writing?
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
Ah.
what you're talking about is that's their voice. Like Quentin
Ah.
Tarantino has a specific voice.
Oh,
Spielberg
okay.
has a specific voice. I think voice is different than style. But I mean, here's a really good example. This one cracks me up. I think in one of my first books, I used the phrase brown study. You didn't know what that was, and then my other beta reader took it to mean like poop. And I was like, "No, that's actually a term. It's an archaic term meaning you're, like, lost in thought." When I was growing up, I read that phrase all the time. He was in a brown study, she was in a brown study. It wasn't anything like, horrible. But the fact that, like, you didn't even know what it was and that my other beta reader just, like, fricking giggled her head off about it, I ended up taking the phrase out and changing it.
Yeah. Oh, this is like how emojis have changed over the years. Like now you can't use a thumbs up emoji because it's passive aggressive.
Is it really? I use it
Yeah,
all the time! Oh, no.
for millennials, it's passive aggressive.
Oh, no!
So I use it with my peers of my age. They don't care, but because we all still use it. But like
I always
supposedly,
thought that a thumbs up meant, like, I've seen this. Like, cool, check, I've seen it. That's what I thought it meant. That's how
yeah.
I use it.
No, it's
Oh my gosh!
for yeah. There's I read a whole article. I'll have to find it and link it in the notes. But there's
Oh
a whole
my
article
word.
about don't use these emojis because they tick off millennials or something like that.
How is a thumbs up passive aggressive?
It's kind of like okay, yeah, whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay, so my apologies right now. I'm putting it out there. If anyone ever thought I was being passive aggressive when I thumbs up your comment, it was just me saying, cool, I've seen this. I wasn't being a jerk. Okay, carrying on. I got to put that out there.
That's kind of the thing. And in screenwriting too, I've come across this a lot is that the style of just even formatting your screenplay has changed over the years. Just in the years since I
Yeah.
started screenwriting, which has been 15 plus years now, the things that I was told to do back then, when you follow the instructions are
Hmm.
now frowned upon. Like, no, don't bold this, don't italicize, don't, like you said, the adverb thing, don't parentheticals, don't use cuts, don't use. And then there's supposedly the screenwriter's Bible, which I have kind of I point to whenever I have a question on
Hmm.
just the writing rules of style, kind of like the AP style guide kind of thing for journalism. I still get called out on things I do, and I'm like, but it's in the Bible. But someone else's screenwriting coach or teacher said it's a different way. You format
Yeah.
montages a certain way. You format, inserts or music lyrics. So those are like real technical style things. But I know what you're talking about as far as the voice and
Yeah.
the grammar and things like that.
Well, like, for example, when I was doing a lot of sketch comedy writing, if you've ever looked at an SNL script, they actually don't have a lot of directions at all.
Hmm.
And I was kind of taught to not put in as few parentheticals as possible, to put in as few even like just directions in general. Not stage directions, but you don't have to set the scene. Like, for example, you'd be like, "It's a modern office," and that's it. You don't have to be like, "It's a modern office, and she's got these pictures on the wall, and the light is coming from a sky." You don't, like stuff that you might maybe put in a book or you might have seen in an older script. But now they're like, "No, that's the director's call. That's the DP's call. Don't tell him that." You know?
So they like just want dialogue and absolutely necessary like blocking kind of stuff.
Yeah, and, like, the bare minimum description. I don't know if that's changed because I was kind of going in that direction, and I remembered, I think actually in our writers group, I did say to somebody, "You have too much description. This would be a director's thing." He's like, "Oh, I'm directing it." I'm like, "Okay, that's different." But
Yeah.
if you're selling it, you gotta take all of this stuff out.
Hmm.
But yeah, one thing I've noticed, that's really interesting in current writing is just, and it could be the YA thing maybe, because perhaps with fiction, they do get a little more flowery and stuff, but what's funny is YA word count, this is novels now, has gotten bigger. It really
Mm.
has. Like, I think originally, maybe in the 80s and 90s, word count was low, like 50,000 or less. Because, like, the YA novels from, like, the 80s and 90s are really, really thin. And then J.K. Rowling blew it out of the water. So now, like, yeah, I mean, like, I aim for 80,000 in my books, but, like, if I go up to 100, it's not a huge deal. So even and maybe that's why. Maybe because the word counts are higher, that's why they don't want to be that flowery with the writing. But it's amazing. I'm like, "Oh, look, there's another LY word. There's another one. There's another one." Yes, you would be so upset with me. Stephen King would be smacking me upside the head if I did that. But apparently, we're okay with it now.
Is it because of the audience or is it because of uh, the editors and things? Well, you don't have
You know,
editors. I do your editing.
well, yeah, you do my editing. I mean, these people, these are, like I said, these are publisher books, so they have
Right.
editors. And
Hmm.
it's not the same author. It's across, like, different
Really.
authors, different genres. Like, one I saw it in, like, a straight YA book. The one I'm currently doing is, like, a YA sci-fi book. So it's across genres. So I think it's more just a general stylistic thing than, like, a specific author thing.
Do you
It
happen to
could
know if the authors are like the same age or what are they age are they? Like what demographic are we talking about here?
I mean, it kind of runs the gamut,
Oh.
I think they're, like, maybe 30s, 40s.
But they're
Um,
all writing for the same audience, I guess. The YA
yeah.
audience.
Yeah. I don't know if that makes a difference. I'd have to, like I said, I'd have to probably look at, like, a current general fiction book, and, of course, like, certain things, like a historical fiction book probably feels different than, like, a YA sci-fi book, for sure.
Mhm.
But I've just been noticing it as I narrate more and more, and I'm like, "Oh, wow." Romance novels, like, the same thing. They just wanna get into the thought fast and get out of it fast versus being flowery, and it seems to be acceptable. You know? So, I don't know if Stephen King needs to update that book and say, adverbs are okay.
Adverbs are not evil.
Yeah, like, we like adverbs. Now, obviously, the exception is if a person is speaking, right? I'm talking
Mhm.
strictly just the narration part. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing, I'm trying to think of what other
See,
style
I've been coaching all my peer review people in my writers groups and stuff
mhm.
to not use them, and now I'm gonna find out I've been doing it all wrong. But usually in screenwriting, it's about economy of words to keep those action
Yes.
lines, brief, because like you were talking about with Saturday Night Live, a reader script, as they call it, usually we want to move fast. You want them to keep reading, and every time they have to stop to read description, that's takes more brain power than like reading dialogue and
Yeah.
seeing that conversation happen. So that's why I do it, and it usually makes for a tighter script. So,
And it might just be because they are YA novels, they want them to feel fast. It could be that.
hmm.
But, I mean, like I said, I've seen it in romance as well. So,
I mean, it comes down to how do people really speak. I mean, we use adverbs
true.
all the time. So
True.
it almost feels a little unnatural when you're writing it that way in a screenplay or maybe in a novel to kind of avoid that. It almost feels stunted in some ways.
Yeah.
Everything I've been reading has told me to do. So I don't know. Now you've making me question everything I believe, Roshni.
I'm so sorry, but yeah, I mean, and I'm finding it even now as I'm working on my 7th book in the series. Any readers will probably see me dancing between adverbs in book 1 and then getting more descriptive, like, in the middle books, and this one, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth as I read these other books. Sometimes I mean, I'm only on first draft, so obviously things will change, but sometimes it's just easier to use 1 word than 10 to describe something, honestly.
Well,
I
sure.
you know, just I mean, just but just, like, it just feels better is what I'm trying to say, you know? It probably
Hmm.
reads better when you're narrating it too. I don't know. I don't know. I
Are
mean,
there any other particularly interesting changes you've seen? Like anything else that stood out to you besides the adverb thing?
I think and I'd be curious to see if this is like this in scripts, but I've noticed also now this is definitely a huge time jump, but do you remember, like, say, Huck Finn would be a really good example,
Hmm.
or I'm trying to think, I don't know if To Kill a Mockingbird had this as much, but if characters were from a certain region, they'd write it a certain way. So,
Mm.
like, instead of saying, I'm trying to think of a sentence off the top of my head, like if it was a Southern character and you knew they had a Southern accent, instead of it of the phrase say, instead of the phrase saying like, "I'm believing that's wonderful," or something, then it
Mm.
might say, "I'm believin' apostrophe that's wonderful," or something like that. Do you know what I mean? To try to, like, tell you
Like
that they have
write
an
it in
accent?
the yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard both ways on that in screenwriting. I generally have come to the practice of defining my character's style when I introduce them and then writing it normally and letting the
Mhm.
actor do it because the
Yeah,
actor is going to engage in that character and become that character and they're going to create that voice
for
and
sure.
I just need them to know what to say, not how to say it. That's
Yeah,
because and that's the whole don't coach the actor on the page kind of thing or
for
just
sure.
like you wouldn't direct it on the page. Those are for other people like we talked
Yeah.
about, not your job.
Yeah, and I've noticed that now in literature, again, because 'cause I'm narrating all this stuff. A good example, I just did, Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, which is weird. It's like book 7 or something in the series, public domain, and it has that, right? She's from Kansas,
Hmm.
and so sometimes they'll just kind of write it so it's sort of supposed to suggest she has an accent. But now as I see in modern literature, they'll just tell you, "He's got a Russian accent. She's from the South," but it's written normally.
Mm,
You know,
okay.
they don't put you towards that is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some books in the last few years that do that, and it's hard to read
It
because
is.
you almost have to like pretend to be that person for a moment.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I just had someone post one of these online, one of these tests where it's like, if you can read this, your brain is whatever, and it's all the letters are jumbled up or
Okay.
backwards or mirrored, and your brain can adjust to it because all the letters are correct. They're just grouped in different orders or something like that. But it's kind of like that. But when you're talking about accents like Brooklyn or Russian, I've never spoken like that, on purpose, so it's harder for me to automatically sync with it.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a mental language function in our brains that makes that hard to read, even though if you hear it you immediately understand what it means.
for sure, and I think
Yeah, your brain converts it when you hear it, but when you see it written it's a different function.
yeah, and I think part of the problem too with writing in dialect speak like that, I don't know the technical term for it, is it's one person's interpretation of how they think that accent should sound,
Mm.
but it might not be accurate. Do you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So, I think that's part of also like, yeah, you're like, "My brain's missing the letters," but also, like, that Southern accent or that Russian accent or whatever might not sound the way you wrote it on the page, it sounds different in my head, so now it's like double does not compute, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I will say this, I've been reading, scripts from some of my peers in one of my writers groups, and I know they're African American, and their stories are urban in
Mm,
many cases, and they do write in language that they're used to, that they've heard their whole lives, and
mhm,
for them, it's very natural. For me, it's a little tricky. I understand it. I understand the setting of the script. I
mhm,
understand the characters are described fine, and it's you get into the flow of it once you read it a little bit, but it's unusual for me. And in that case, I would say that they should not convert it into proper English,
yeah,
because indicative of their genre, their whole genre. Like, it's not just a character in the story, it's the genre of the film or the show.
is it slang? Is it the slang, or is it, like, are they writing in, like, a dialect?
I'm not sure I can answer that.
Okay,
It's some of both.
mhm,
It's mostly, I'm thinking dialect though. It's the way the words are phrased and clipped and, altered, and the shorthand that people use in all cultures to talk to each other, no
yeah,
matter what, country or region you're from. There's a shorthand, obviously people can have communications even in just your family. You can literally grunt at each other and you know what you're saying, right?
for sure, yep.
Yeah, so, it's kinda like that.
Oh, cool.
And if you're dealing with, a subject matter and a genre that the audience and the characters and the actors are all gonna be on the same page with, then it shouldn't be any issue. But in those cases, you're not talking about what they call a 4-quadrant film that everyone's gonna go watch
Yeah,
kinda thing,
that's a
that would
very specific
yeah,
audience. It's
you
like
try
if
to
you know,
pitch
you
that
know.
yeah, you try to pitch that script to one of the major studios, and there might not be a good reaction to it because of the, literally language barrier.
Mhm,
It's a language barrier. But if you're pitching to niche, indie studios that deal in that genre, they're gonna
mhm,
see it as you understand the audience and
for
the genre
sure.
we're making. So it's
Yeah,
kind of a weird double-edged sword. I think if you're going to be writing and you want anything to be, you're going to produce it yourself, you can do what you want, obviously.
of
But if you're
course.
going to be pitching it to a studio, a major studio or a network, you have to keep that in mind. I would use it sparingly, only when it really has to be used. It goes
Mhm,
back to the establish your characters, and that will dictate the actor to read it a certain way versus expecting the reader and the story editor and the producer and everybody at the studio it's going to have to go up through to read it that way.
yeah. I think that's cool. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I love linguistics, I do. I think because I'm around words so much now, I'm just like, I love linguistics, I love, like, cultural studies like that, stuff like that. It's just I don't know, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I actually just well, this latest script I'm working on with the story producer has Latino characters in it. I'm not Latino. I did
Mhm,
take a lot of Spanish in high school and college though, but I wanted it to be somewhat authentic. I'm trying to have a couple of Latino leads,
mhm,
and so I used the Spanish I know to create some scenes where an older a parent is talking to their child and they're using Spanish and English mixed.
mhm.
And I feel like it came off pretty good. But the story editor, he's like, I took some Spanish, but I'm tripping over it a little bit. And it's like, and I actually should ask him about this, because it's like, do you think that's a problem when you pitch this to someone? That's a good question. A lot of times when you have scripts that have other languages in them, they just say in French, in Russian, in
Mhm.
Chinese, and they write it out in English, knowing that later it'll be translated and shot that way.
Yeah. But, okay, that actually brings up a really interesting point. And now this is more like style, culture, sensitivity than, like, the original topic, but if you're writing something, like, let's say you said you're writing it in Spanish, now you didn't grow up with it. So you're gonna have a certain type of approach to the Spanish than somebody who grew up with it would. You know what I mean? You're gonna say things maybe like the
Mhm,
proper way that you learned, whereas they might
mhm,
have more slang. Or like in the case of like this is actually something that's happening in the game I'm working on because there's Filipino characters, we have Taglish, you know? I didn't grow
Mm,
up I mean, I heard the language, I didn't grow up knowing it, but, like, I would hear things like, "Blah, blah, 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 purple, blah, 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 table," and I'm like, "Yeah, they don't translate table," but it's just, like it's just the way they talk, and
mm,
so it's different from, like, being properly taught, like you probably were in school, versus someone who grew up with it, and they'd have their own cadence, and they'd throw in their own,
mhm.
Spanglish words or whatever.
Right,
Do you
I
see what
have
I'm
no
saying?
cultural reference. I have
Yeah,
textbook Spanish basically in a little
exactly.
college where we did a little literature reading, but it kind of like the Japanese I've been studying, where Japanese has when you listen to someone speaking Japanese, you will hear words like teberu, or
Mhm,
adergi, and you think they're just saying English words wrong, but they're not. They
mhm.
were taught to use a specific, it's actually a whole other alphabet, sort of, so to speak, in Japanese called katakana, and it's not just English words sounded out with their characters; it's the words they learn. So
Mm,
it's not like they're saying it wrong. They're saying it how they grew up and will learn to say it
yeah,
in Japanese. It's a kind of
yeah,
it's a particular like dialect of Japanese, but it is Japanese. So it's weird because there's this kind of impetus to insist that, oh, you're just saying it wrong, but they're not.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then you get into the whole thing too. I mean, going back to the Spanish example, is it Spanish American? Is it Mexican Spanish? Is it Spanish Spanish? You know what I mean? Because different places will have different dialects and different ways of saying
Yeah.
things, and then you get into that whole thing too, depending on how accurate you're trying to be, which is
Yeah.
why I love narrating fantasy books because if I need to be a little inaccurate on accents or something, it's okay. Obviously, if it's something based in reality, I really have to
The elves are not
dial it
coming to
in.
get you for mispronouncing their words.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's funny because 'cause I'll do everybody wants the elves to be British, and I do a British accent, but, like, sometimes at least in fantasy, you can fudge some of those accents because it's a fake world, as
Right.
opposed to, like, when I'm actually doing something set in reality, I'm like, "Oh, I gotta be spot on with this accent. Oh boy. Okay, here we go," you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We've kind of tangented off into like
For
our
sure.
previous episode about writing an identity that's not your own. So I would
Yes.
recommend people go listen to that episode with Alex Tembelor. It was a really good episode.
Much more thorough than what we're doing here.
Yeah, yeah, but all those things do play into style, like you were
Yeah.
saying, and
Yeah.
it's the writing of the work and how that all comes out in it, and it's important to make sure you're being accurate and following whatever the current rules are, because it's a wild west out there and everyone likes to think that they know the right way to write things in a screenplay or a novel, but the guidelines are just guidelines.
Yeah, really. It's one of those you have to know the rules before you can break them. I was thinking of another style thing. This is something you also slammed me on in the beginning, and I see it a lot in current novels, is the fragments. So,
Mm,
like, for example, let me think of a sentence. It would be like, um, she walked into the room, period. Brushed her hair, period. Sat down on the bed, period. Cried, period. And even though those last 4 sentences are fragments, it gives a certain feel to the story, right?
there's a
But
cadence. Yeah.
yeah, but I remember you used to be like, "Those aren't complete sentences," and you'd get on my case. But I'm seeing that a lot in current writing.
Really.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I don't mind it. Like, I think used some people rely on it a lot, like, it's just their style, like, it's the way they like to write. I'll use it every so often, and it feels better in certain things than others, like, it feels good, for example, in a dramatic piece or, like, in a thriller, right?
Yeah.
It might not necessarily work for, like, a high fantasy, you know? But and so you have to kind of pick and choose, but those are also things that I think maybe even 10 years ago, people would have been like, "What are you doing
Mm.
writing in fragments?" And now it's like, "Oh, that feels good." So
Yeah, I've in screenwriting, I've loosened up on that myself. I see
mhm,
it more often. And again, it's like you said, once you know the rules, then you can start to break them.
mhm.
And in screenwriting, it can be a useful tool in the description and the actions lines to do that when appropriate. You don't just do it to like, I got to make my action line shorter. So you
Yeah,
chop it all up. because then it becomes confusing. But if it's dramatically used in a purposeful way, it's okay.
For sure, for sure. Speaking of style, I already know who I'm thinking of. Who is your favorite screenwriter or author or whatever to read for style, and why?
I don't even know. Oh my God, that's such a hard question.
Okay, I'll
I
give
have
you mine.
Go ahead.
Aaron Sorkin. If you are
Oh.
an aspiring screenwriter, get a copy of any of his scripts. He uses words so well. Like, every word has a purpose, and for actors, he tells you with the punctuation, so his scripts are perfect, just so you know. He
Hmm.
tells you with the punctuation how you read that line, and it's beautifully done. If you
Mm.
read an Aaron Sorkin script, you do not have a question of what is happening or how to interpret that character. And it's the most concise, really well done writing I've ever read as I've studied scripts and studied writers. So I definitely put him out there if you're as a
Mm.
writer in general, if you're an
Yeah.
actor, screenwriter, go get an Aaron Sorkin script. Look at the page. He's so
Mm.
good.
I would say M. Night Shyamalan. Because I've been writing horror and thrillers lately. I love how his characters um you know react, and they're it's almost like they have a voice without a voice. Like there's a lot of especially if you watch his films, there's a lot of communication without speaking. And that's something
Oh,
I've
yeah.
wanted to learn to do more of because I'm too wordy, I'm too exposition on the page. So I have been trying to get more into and it's not just this. I see this a ton in scripts. So and so glances, or gives a glance or a look. It's like, no,
Mhm,
it's not that, because that's on the nosy kind of stuff. It's the more subtle kind of things. It's trying to figure out
mhm.
how to do that in a way that conveys more emotion than just action.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'd be curious then what the script for A Quiet Place, the first one, looks
Mm.
like.
Oh, I actually have studied this. There's a couple good YouTube videos that break it down, and
Mhm.
it is the weirdest script because they go way the heck out. They use pictures and spacing. Like there's one page that has one word on it, and spacing and images and breaking things up into chunks and things. It's very
Huh.
dynamic. They knew they were going to have to do a really different kind of script to put this together. And I definitely suggest people go look that up. I'll try to find that video it's either a video or an article. I'll try to find that and put it in the show notes.
That's cool. So they
Yeah.
storyboarded it more than, like, text,
It's not
it
even
sounds like.
storyboards. It could be a picture of an object, not like a picture of a scene, but just like throwing pictures of objects in, and things that like sounds
Yeah.
and environmental things. Just it's not your typical script for sure, obviously, because there's
Oh, I
very,
wanna
very
see
little
that.
dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
One
cool.
of those super, super outliers of scripts.
Yeah. Yeah, because 'cause I'm trying to think of A Quiet Place, the first one. I don't know if they had any dialogue. Maybe in flat did they do flashbacks? It's been a
They
while since I've
had they
seen
had
it,
dialogue in sign language,
but not spoken.
but
Nothing
not spoken.
spoken.
They might have had said some. I don't remember, but they did have some times when they were. Remember, whenever they were around like falling water, rain or waterfalls,
Oh,
they
that's
were
right.
safe
That's
because
right.
that noise blocked things. So there was some
Yeah.
talking there. That might have been the second one though, or the third one. I watched
No,
the
you're
third
right, they
one.
did talk in a waterfall, yeah. I've
Yeah,
only seen it once, and I only saw it in the theater, so I'm trying to
yeah.
remember
I was
what
with
it
you when
was.
we saw it in the theater.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a
You,
great movie.
yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because 'cause I've seen the other 2 after it, and those I bet are probably more like normal scripts because there is more talking, but it's been so long since I saw the first one that I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember everything that happened. But yeah. Yeah, I definitely wanna check. Yeah, put it in the show notes because I wanna see it.
Okay. I'll send it to you when I find it.
Yay, thank you. So how about for you, what style changes have you noticed in your own writing, in other people's writings as you start to read and explore things? Let us know in the comments. Follow us online on Instagram and Twitter, Twitter X, whatever it's called now, at WG Therapy. You can also find us online at writersgrouptherapy.com, and we will talk to you in a few weeks.